I'm really going to very quickly tell you that I once was a scientist. I spent 30 years working on the mechanism of DNA replication. I consider myself a biochemist and cell biologist. But we're going to skip all that. I suddenly got a phone call in August of 1992 saying this committee of the Academy, National Academy of Sciences of the United States, like they choose the president of the Academy like they choose the Pope. They sat in this secret room and smoke was rising, and I got a call that they had selected me to be the president even though I didn't want to do this. So I don't know if that happens to the Pope as well, but I think I did move. And I gave up my laboratory because it's a full-time job in Washington, and I ended up living here for 12 years. So the Academy was founded by Abraham Lincoln, and it had a charter. And this charter had a very important paragraph in it, which nobody understands where it came from. But it said, the Academy shall, whenever called upon by any department of the government, investigate, examine, and report upon any subject of science or art. Art at that time meant, in this sense, technology, science or technology. And here was the catch. But the Academy shall receive no compensation whatsoever for any services to the government of the United States. And I don't understand that one either. But it ended up creating a very strong volunteer tradition in which now today some 6,000 scientists, engineers, and others serve on committees studying issues for the government, mostly for the government. And it's been expanded to include the National Academy of Engineering and the Institute of Medicine, two other honorary organizations under the same charter. And then during World War I, the National Research Council was set up because it was recognized that if you're going to do this kind of work for the government, you need more than members of the Academy. You could need teachers, lawyers, others to bring in as appropriate. And my major point is that this was a very interesting job, but it was also very educational. I guess all of life is an education anyway. I just want to tell you 3 examples of how we work. I think every country needs an organization to tell truth to government based on science and technology, and that's basically what the Academy does. I'll give you 3 examples. When I was there, about 1995, there was a big scare. Some work done in Scandinavia, popularized in the press, suggested that hair dryers, refrigerators, the electromagnetic fields in households were causing cancer. And so we set up a committee, and they looked at some 500 studies going back many years, and they concluded that actually that wasn't correct. There was no evidence that these fields are dangerous, and that prevented the government from having to protect us against things that are not dangerous and wasting resources. The opposite conclusion was found in this study that got a lot of publicity because President Bush, when he came into office, the second President Bush, rejected the lower arsenic drinking water standards that President Clinton had just set, causing a furor. The head of the EPA, Christy Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey, actually was embarrassed. She was his appointment. And she basically asked the Academy to do a 6-month study to see how dangerous arsenic was in drinking water. We found it was even more dangerous than we thought before, and immediately the policy was reversed. Here's one that's obviously relevant to Turkey and all of much of the world. The United States obviously is making great use of genetically modified crops. The U.S. National Academies look back over the many years that we've been using these in huge amounts and published a report that said that in fact there's no evidence at all that these have caused any harm. In fact, they offer substantial net environmental and economic benefits compared to conventional crops. This is the sense of the way science informs important decisions made by societies. So why are scientific judgments like these crucial for policymakers? When you think about it, science has allowed us to gain a really good understanding of how the natural world works. And so this allows us often to predict the effects of current actions on the future. That's exactly what that arsenic report did. It said if you drink 5 parts per billion of arsenic in drinking water for 30 years, you could expect this many bladder cancers. If it's 10 parts per billion, you'll expect this many more. And then, of course, the policymakers use that factual knowledge to base important future decisions on. And here's one we have right now, of course, in a cartoon form. But basically, we know from science that this is a major problem, as many others have said today. Critical issue is that this is independent policy advice. See, we do a lot of this, about one report every working day. But the critical part of my job as Academy President was to keep that advice independent. The government agencies were often asked, like the EPA would be asked by Congress when they get their appropriation, here's money for next year, but you must have a study by the Academy of the effects of particulates in air, or whatever. Something that the Congress was worried that the EPA was making a mistake on, or whatever other agency it was. Often, the agency doesn't want to make public any problems that they have. And especially after 9/11, we would get requests, you should give us this report in a brown paper bag. Don't publish it because this knowledge will help terrorists attack the country or whatever. And of course, we make government mad often. But that's important. That was our job, was really to tell truth to Washington. And so we released the full press report to the press. At the same time, it goes up on our website and to the government. And why does it work? I think it works because we're lucky that science is respected, at least still respected in the United States enough that every side wants to say that their point of view, their side of the argument has science supporting it. Of course, you could always find a scientist to support any position because that's the way science works. Scientists are trained to be skeptical. The academies present the overwhelming consensus on an issue, and of course, if you're going to proceed with policymaking, you should use the consensus. And to make that possible, setting up the committee is important. You have to have a very balanced committee with all kinds of different points of view represented, and you have to get those people to not represent anybody but themselves so that they could change their mind by what they learn when they work together. And the Academy has a very rigorous report review process to avoid mistakes, because in the early days we made a few mistakes. That led in about 1970 to this report review that makes sure that everything the committee said has evidence to base it on, and make sure that they stick to the science. For example, in the arsenic in drinking water report, the committee would have liked to say, therefore, set the rate level at 5 parts per billion or whatever. But in fact, there's no safe level of arsenic in drinking water as far as we know. So the point is we tell the government the scientific facts and they have to make the cost-benefit judgment. And that's, by sticking to the science, we play a special role and let the politicians and let the policymakers play their role. And of course, the press is very important here. And this is critical to have a press that could say whatever they want to say. Here's a very unusual day where we had both headlines. This was actually the day where the arsenic in drinking water report was released, and that was announced that they would accept the lower level of arsenic in drinking water that Clinton had announced. And it was also the day when we produced a major report on stem cells, because the government at that point didn't want to support stem cell research. So when I came to the Academy in 1993, there was no such thing as a World Wide Web. It was hard to imagine now, isn't it? 1994, we had the web. That was the perfect thing for the Academy. We've been publishing all these books, 200 a year, going into dusty libraries, and now everything we publish forever could be available anywhere around the world. In fact, there's some now 4,000 books that are freely available as PDFs on the website. The central lesson for my 12 years in Washington, this is what I learned, part of my education, that it's critically important that science and scientists achieve a much higher degree of influence, both throughout each nation and by working together across the world. In particular, I'd like to talk about something called a scientific temper, a term coined by the first Prime Minister of India, Mr. Nehru, who recognized that this kind of scientific set of ways of thinking, creative, rational, open, and tolerant thinking that are inherent to science, really critical for creating successful societies. And I think every nation needs more of that. It's my favorite quote. It's from a book written by a physicist, Jacob Bronowski, 1956, still in print. Bronowski, as a young man, flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki and was very depressed. Is science good or bad for the world? Of course, he wanted to think it was good. So he then spent 10 years reading and thinking about science, and of course he published this book which concluded that on balance, science is very good for the world. He said, the Society of Scientists is simple because it has a directing purpose to explore the truth. Nevertheless, it has to solve the problem of every society, which is to find a compromise between the individual and the group. It must encourage the single scientist to be independent and the body of scientists to be tolerant. From these basic conditions, which form the prime values, there follows step by step a range of values: dissent, freedom of thought and speech, justice, honor, human dignity, and self-respect. Science has humanized our values. Men have asked for freedom, justice, and respect precisely as the scientific spirit has spread among them. I'm going to have to read that book that I heard about this morning because it obviously, this rational society that's spreading throughout the world is really, to me, the basis for future progress. So I think one of the major things we need to do if we're going to actually be successful here and create a different kind of society that's more effective is have a much larger focus on science education starting at the very beginning of school, but not the kind of science education that most countries, most kids get today. So I talk about redefining what is meant by science education at all levels, starting in kindergarten, age 5, through college. And I learned about this when I came to the Academy, because this is the hardest report we ever produced, the National Science Education Standards, and we were right in the middle of it when I got there, and it needed a lot of work. It was chaotic. And I spent half my time the next 2 years actually working on this report. It had 18,000 reviewers. We normally have 18. It took a whole year to take all those reviews and make this 250-page document. We talked about science with an emphasis on active inquiry, and we had to produce guides for teachers because they had never done inquiry. And this is what science should look like in school, and I would say at every level. This is a bunch of 11-year-olds, San Francisco, working around a table with four kids trying to solve a structured problem. The classroom is noisy. The teacher's a coach, not the source of all knowledge. And we know how to do this, it's just that we don't do it nearly enough. For audiences like this, I'd like to talk about what the curriculum was in San Francisco when I left for the first year of school, 5-year-olds, to give you an idea what kind of science education I'm talking about and how this differs from the kind of science education that most of us had, which was probably memorizing scientific words. These kids come in, it's got to be done at the right time of year when the seeds are on the ground. They put on white socks. They're told to walk around under the trees in the park or in the schoolyard. And they come back in and take off the socks, and of course the socks have all these specks on them. Most of the specks will be rocks and things like that, dirt. but some of them will be seeds because seeds evolved to stick to animal fur. So the kids are then given a piece of paper with numbered squares in it, and with little forceps, they take off each speck and put it in a numbered square. Each kid does this. And then they have a little $3 microscope where they look at each square and then draw what's in each square. What does it look like? And then they have a debate about how they might figure out which ones are seeds. And again, the 5-year-old kids, the teacher does not tell them the answer. Eventually, some kid will suggest that these regular shaped things that they saw, that they were drawing, the regular shaped ones could be the seeds. And then eventually, the teacher lets the class discuss and say, well, that's a reasonable idea. And then this goes on for days, of course, with 5-year-olds. And then the question is, how can we test your idea? And eventually, some kid will say, well, we could plant the bunch of specks. The specks that we think are seeds and the specks that we think are dirt and so on. So this is the way science actually works. And it shows that you could do this kind of, start training kids to think logically and rationally even in the first years of school. So the vision is to have an education that includes problems like this being solved in school. Of course, get harder as kids get older. We have all these curriculum. It's been developed for many years. In fact, the United States post-Sputnik became a leader in developing this kind of curriculum. I think the children who are prepared in this life would be great problem solvers in the workplace, very important for the economy. The New York Times the other day had an article about Michigan, 9% unemployment, but now that the economy is recovering, they can't find enough people to work in machine shops and manufacturing industries. We're not training our population to be productive. In addition, these people would be more rational human beings who could make wise decisions for their families, their community, their nation, and the world. Everybody's trying to fool us all the time. Politicians, internet scams, and so on. It's a new world to migrate through, and we need a different kind of education to enable people to do this. So my friends are all surprised when I put most of the blame for where we are in the United States on the college and universities, because the fact is, when I came to the academy and said I wanted to work on science education, many of my members said, well, we realize it's an important problem, but it's somebody else's problem. It's the unions, it's the school boards, it's the textbook writers. But in fact, this is what education looks like. All the arrows point at the poor teachers. Incidentally, my daughter's a high school science teacher, so I know a lot about this. There are complicated systems here, but it's the colleges, the faculties of arts and science who teach the parents and teach the teachers what science is. And if we make biology 1 my field, all the facts that scientists have learned about biology, and kids, even those who get an A, really don't know anything about what science is or how to think like a scientist. Then we've defined science in a way, because we have all the prestige, that permeates all the way down to kindergarten, where you might have kids memorizing 4 kinds of whales or something. I mean, basically, if you look at what happens and look at textbooks for middle school, they're just diluted versions of the college textbook with all its words. Actually, the hardest books I've ever tried to read. So we have to change. And an important barrier to progress is this fact that we could fill a room 3 times as big with students, and one lecturer could batch process all the students by talking for an hour. This is the way most of us were taught. The real question is, can we create much better alternatives without a great increase in cost? Because that kind of teaching doesn't lead you to problem solving, and it doesn't lead you to learn how to think like a scientist. So here I am at a now 10-year-old institute that's run by the Academy at the University of Wisconsin with Howard Hughes' support, which takes teams of Biology 1 teachers and for a week teaches them what we've learned about how to teach differently. And one simple thing is just the use of this TV remote kind of device called a clicker. Actually, we published in Science Magazine, and others have published also, of course, that this actually technique started at Harvard in physics maybe 20 years ago. But basically, the idea is that in a lecture room like this, I'd stop every 15 minutes, and I'd put up a slide with a multiple choice question I know half the class will get wrong. It's got to be the right kind of question, conceptual, not a factual question. The kids vote with these pointers. I hit a button and a slide comes up with a bar graph of how the class voted. They see that they all got different results. Then the critical thing, they turn around for 2 or 3 minutes and discuss with their neighbor what they think the right answer is. Then they vote again. So on average, it goes from 50% right to say 85% right. And actually, it doesn't really make any difference whether your neighbors know the right answer or not. I mean, we published a paper in Science about that. It's basically the idea of thinking about it and discussing it. And you might do that 3 times during the course of a normal lecture. So that's one. Doesn't cost, it doesn't cost more money. But there are many other examples. This is my ideal. This is the University of Minnesota. Just opened a new science building with 17 no-lecture rooms. These are flat rooms with, it looks like that middle school classroom I showed you in San Francisco, except that there are 9 kids around each table, and each table has 2 computers connected to the internet, plus an overhead screen that they could project one of the computers onto, and the teacher walks around, noisy classroom, solving problems. The first 5 minutes is a little exam on readings that replace what would have been done in lecture, just to make sure that the readings have been done. And the whole time is spent on problem solving. And again, there's research showing the effectiveness of this kind of teaching. This is the image we want for science. It's not what we have now. This is, of course, the Einstein statue in front of the Academy building on Constitution Avenue, where all these kids come to take their class picture at the end of their week at Washington. It's got a very friendly lap. This is not the image we have. I have lots of stories I could tell you about how far we have to go to change what most people think of science and scientists. I'll just give you one. You all know about the AAAS fellowship that for years has brought outstanding young scientists and engineers to work for a year in government, and that many of them have stayed. But now there's the same kind of much smaller program to the California state legislatures, sponsored by a foundation. So every year, 10 carefully selected outstanding young people are offered to the legislature free as staff. Well, the first year, it was hard to find anybody who wanted them. The image of scientists was such, why would I want a scientist? They made me feel uncomfortable, or what, I guess, in my last class, and they're arrogant, whatever. We're now up to third class. After the first year, everybody wants them. And in fact, of the first 19, 10 have been permanently hired in Sacramento, 7 of them in the legislature. So this is the kind of issue and opportunities we have. And I'm sure this problem is not unique to the United States. I just want to end by talking about Science Magazine. I've been there since early 2008. Obviously try to help call attention to things that really work. We have a wonderful program at the National Institutes of Health called the Young Innovator Award. I've been a referee almost every year. My to-do tomorrow is actually go through the score of the applicants. I argued that the number of these awards, which encourage young people to do something different, should be raised 5-fold in this editorial a couple of years ago. And what happened? It dropped in half. So that shows how effective I've been. But anyway, I would keep trying. Many editorials from around the world: India, Africa. My current obsession is this refining science education, trying to make this actually happen. We published several special issues of Science that devoted just to science education, not just to, but largely to reviews on science education. This one, I think, on literacy and what we know from research about active science learning and how powerful that is, not only to get kids to think rationally, but to be able to read and write and communicate. And if we could bring science to the center of the curriculum by making it the way which we learn how to read and write, of course, this would be an incredibly powerful change. We've had 2 years of a contest for the best free science education websites. They're all freely accessible, open access on our website, and we're producing a little electronic booklet of all of them as we speak for science teachers. Because there's so many good things on the web, but it's too much. Much of it's lost in this mass of other stuff. This is the first winner from the University of Utah, genetics. That's just an example, a whole range of kinds of stuff at every age level. And the most recent contest, maybe not surprising from what I've said, is to try to improve college science teaching. We've had a prize now, continuing for a second year if you want to enter, for the very best inquiry-based active learning modules for college students. And here's the first winner. We've now published 2 of the winners. This is from North Carolina. And basically, all the ingredients are there in the electronic supplement, all the information you need to actually do that lab. So the idea is that scientists always copy and build on what everybody else does. That's why it's successful. But in education, we often don't do that. We rarely do that. So we're trying to encourage a different tradition in science education. And these are just my last 2 editorials. I keep on trying. I just want to end up with a little bit about the breadth of science and how it could reach out to people I never understood could benefit from science until I came to the academy. Here I am in Africa, in a remote village where subsistence farmers had been routinely going through a month of starvation every year because they couldn't grow enough food. And by working with local Kenyan scientists, the guy with a tie is a scientist, obviously, they had learned how to grow corn, you can see, really well. So that now they're no longer starving, and this technology was spreading from village to village. And here, I spent a lot of time in India with a project led by the great agricultural scientist M.S. Swaminathan to see how science could be brought to rural India based on starting with wireless internet communications that allow scientists in India to work with villagers. And this facilities are staffed by volunteers called village knowledge workers. Most of them are women. They respond to what the village wants. Information about women's health, for example, was a big issue in this village. Daily market prices. They could hold up some diseased plant to the video and get a diagnosis, and so on. This was the first time I went, but I went back several times, and it kept on expanding, and it's now a source of livelihood. Through these connections, they've enabled villagers to learn how to create little businesses. This one produces parasitic wasps, biopesticides. That's the stuff on the yellow sheet. And it both enabled the village to be more successful without having exposures to chemical pesticides, and these groups to make livelihoods by selling these wasp eggs to the village, other villages, many others, dairies, growing mushrooms, and so on. And I thought I was really surprised to see the bankers there. This is Emma Swaminathan sitting next to me, and the guy in the middle is the governor, and the other two the other guys are bankers. But after this session, we went to lunch with the bankers, and I thought this was charity, but in fact they're making money because these groups of villagers without no collateral are actually paying back loans at 95% rate. And So this technology is now being spread by the bank based on the profit motive. So what I learned is that science and technology really can make a huge number of differences around the world. But we can't do it by Americans going over there or Turks going over there. We have to help every nation build the capacity to do it themselves. And so our whole effort in international relations should be helping other countries build science and technology capacities that they will need to solve their problems themselves. And so I think this is an urgent need for both of us in developed countries and highly developed countries like Turkey, India, China, Brazil. So this is my ending. I served as President Obama's science envoy to Indonesia, which came out of the blue. As you know, in 2009, in June, Obama went to Cairo and gave this famous speech to restart relationships with the Muslim world. And he announced his Science Envoy program, and I was shocked to be asked to be one of these. I had never been to Indonesia. First three Science Envoys, I was the only one who really was born in the United States. Important thing, this is a volunteer position. They pay your expenses to get back and forth. And the challenges and why the first three of us took it is that, like scientists like challenges. What is a science envoy? What are we supposed to do? So we were supposed to design a role for science envoys that would demonstrate that science diplomacy can make a big difference. This involved creating a toolkit of things that envoys could do, help the US government be more effective in supporting envoys. And finally, our real long-range goal for all three of us was convince our government and the world that every nation should have science envoys, not only Muslim majority nations. And so here's my nation, here's my country, a huge country, 250 million people. You fly across it farther than across the United States. Here I am in a science madrasa in Indonesia, boarding school for gifted science students. Science is a universal language. I walked into the library. There was my textbook. That's amazing. Kids are really eager to learn science. This little girl with her fingers up wants to be a physicist. So that Indonesia asked, in fact, President Yudhoyono met with me my first visit and said he wants to be an innovation nation. He had been in Kansas for a year as a young general. His son had had inquiry science by chance during his year in Kansas, and he wanted that kind of science education for Indonesia. This is the Indonesian request, and we sent two really outstanding teachers to run a workshop. Those are the ones way in the back. I don't know if you can see them. Those are the Americans. And we're now trying to create a partnership with Australia through their academy, which has been very effective in teaching inquiry science. Australia and the United States to work together to help Indonesia do this. This is a 10-year project. It's not going to happen in 1 year, obviously. We now have an annual workshop for future leaders of science in each nature. It's called Frontiers of Science. It's a program that our academy is running with the Indonesian Academy of Sciences. This kind of program started about 1997 when our academy ran a similar kind of program with China. Now we have it with Japan, India, and many other countries. But I don't know if you can see my colleague in all this, and that's been critical, is the president of the Indonesian Academy. He's, doesn't work. Anyway, he's the guy in the middle in the front row, Sangat Marzuki. He was just here 2 days ago, and it's completely impossible to be a science envoy without partners like this on the other side to tell you what they need and how to work and what to avoid. Anyway, we're having the second, this is the first one. This is bringing 40, age 35 to 40 future leaders of science in the United States together across all areas of science with a similar number of Indonesians. There's a NSF USAID competitive grant program called PEER that they then compete for collaborative grants. This has been a terrific way terrific investment in the future for U.S.-Indonesian relationships, and I think will help both countries better understand each other and develop better science. And last but not least, my friend Frank Ricciardoni, who I've known for years, is your ambassador in Turkey. A wonderful man. His wife is a PhD molecular biologist, which is how I met him, Marie. And he is a great asset in everything we want to do going forward. So my last slide is this. Wonderful statement from Louis Pasteur. Science knows no country. Knowledge belongs to humanity. It's the torch that illuminates the world. Thank you.